Welcome everyone to this very timely discussion. My name is Gloria Kondrup. If you don't know, I am the Executive Director of the Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography. And we will have an interesting discussion today based around the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But it came about, I have to say, this whole discussion came about in last September when Google Fonts and the Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography partnered yet again with the D&AD, New Blood Awards, to write what's called the typography brief. And we decided our typography brief would be around type as the universal voice of peace, dignity, and equality. And it just so happens it is the same premise around the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was, Christian will give us information about that. So we have three very exciting panelists today that will talk about different aspects about the concept of universal voice, how much typography and communication pays homage to that universal voice, and the importance of understanding global communications and what artists and designers can do and the tools that they can use to personify the concept of peace, dignity, and equality. I want to introduce our panel today. First, we have Christian Delsol. Hi, Christian. You can acknowledge who you are. Christian served as the Public Information Media Specialist for the United Nations Population Fund from 1992 to 2019. I am so honored that you're here. He headed the Populations Fund rebranding campaign, resulting in a new logo, great for our point of view, and first ever style guide, which is still in use. Communication and how information is transmitted is part of one of our major concerns, of course, as a typography center. You served as deputy representative in Kabul, Afghanistan in 2003. He has also collaborated with award-winning photo and video journalists to produce features for the New York Times, Time Magazine, BBC, The Guardian, and National Geographic. And Christian will be talking, of course, he's so familiar, the expert, I would say, on the UN Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And he'll talk to us about it, give us some background information. I'd also like to welcome Marek Jeziorek from Google. Marek was born and grew up in Poland. You can tell by the pronunciation of his name, it's very difficult. Where he studied mathematics, informatics, and mechanics at the University of Warsaw. He received his master's degree in computer science and from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. First, he started early at Intel. We talked about that at its early days of Intel, and later joined Google in 2003. He joined the Google Font team in 2015 as a technical program manager and has been instrumental in the design of Noto font, described as the most ambitious font project in history. I agree. It currently offers fonts for over 1,000 languages, opening the global door to reading and writing. Our third panelist who will present is Jennifer May. Jennifer May is my colleague and the Executive Director for DesignMatters, the Social Innovation Department at ArtCenter College of Design, which explores how design and art can affect change in the areas of sustainable development, social entrepreneurship, health, public policy, social justice. Your most recent editorial project, and I don't have a copy of it because a student stole it out of my hands, by the way, recently, is Design for Social Innovation. It's case studies from around the world, and it was just published in 2021. And Jennifer was named 2020 Impact Maker to Watch in Los Angeles. And she also earned her MBA from USC School of Business. We're going to start, though, today with Christian. And Christian, I have to say, I forgot to tell everyone you have a master's in economic anthropology. Very interesting background that brings you to the United Nations, I think, having that kind of an interesting background. Christian, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can talk to us about the UN and the Universal Declaration. So.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Christian Delsol. I'm honored to be back at DesignMatters. While I was working at the United Nations Population Fund throughout those 20 years so, I worked as a media specialist, and I had the pleasure of visiting your campus, DesignMatters, on several occasions, and we did 3 communication campaigns. While we were working together, I also hosted 3 interns from DesignMatters who came over to New York City, and they were housed at the UN in New York City. My job at the UN has given me the opportunity to work a lot with different types of visual artists, designers, photojournalists, graphic designers, video storytellers, wordsmiths, and political activists to create materials. But I'm really over here to speak to you more about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'll just jump back. When we design all these communication materials, our end purpose is to, whether we come out with a poster, a film, a video, a PSA, or a digital presentation or infographics, we want the work to be memorable in order for it to be effective. And I think we can argue the case that this is exactly the same goal with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We want to ensure that the 30 articles, which are distinct and interdependent, one with the other, we want them to be easily recognized, recalled, paraphrased. So the memory of seeing something that's short, that you can sort of have an image on, is critical to the declaration. It's not a long document. It's something you can actually see and go through its 30 articles. Historically, the declaration was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1948. And it was the result of, after the Second World War, of all the atrocities and what the world had experienced. I'm sorry, I'm looking a little bit to my right because I have my text over here, so bear with me. With the conclusion of the war and the creation of the United Nations, the international community vowed to never again allow atrocities like those of that conflict to happen again. World leaders decided to complement the UN Charter with a roadmap of a system of principles that could ensure the protection of the rights of every individual everywhere. The document they considered, and which would later become the declaration itself, was taken up by the General Assembly in 1946. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a milestone document, as it aimed at ensuring that we all have the right to live in dignity and freedom. It is an affirmation that governments have a pledge to protect individuals and groups against human rights abuse. Following this historic act, the General Assembly called on all UN member states to publicize the text of the declaration, to cause it to be disseminated, displayed, read, expounded, principally in schools and other educational institutions, with distinction based on the political status of countries or territories. I'm sorry, without distinction. It also affirmed that the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Based on this historic document, governments pledge to protect and provide rights and liberty for all, especially the most vulnerable. It is a statement that might is not right. It sets limits on the powerful and inspires hope among the powerless. In a more colloquial rephrasing, the declaration is not about survival of the fittest or the strongest, but it is about society providing equal opportunities to all individuals to determine their choices, the means to exercise those choices. The state exists, the state governments exist to protect, empower, educate all. The declaration puts all nations on the same footing. When people speak to you about it's a jungle, survival of the fittest, that's the exact opposite of what the declaration is about. It's not about survival of the fittest, it's about society. The declaration set a world record in 1999 for being the most translated document in the world. It is now available in hundreds of languages and dialects, from Abzec to Zulu. It just goes on. And the object was to share the declaration with the world, and anyone is welcome to contribute a new translation that is not already in the collection. At present, there are 531 translations available in different formats, including PDFs. But the project of translating is still ongoing. Most recently, the declaration was translated into Noto, which is a dialect in the Philippines, in Uduk and Fru, which are dialects in Sudan, and Tamil, Alsatian, between France and Germany. The Rohingyas have also translated it. It's also translated in Afar, which is in Ethiopia, in Crimean Tartar, and in addition to several sign languages, including in the Netherlands and the US. The declaration is widely recognized as having inspired and paved the way for the adoption of more than 70 human rights treaties that are applied today on a permanent basis at the global and regional level, all of which reference the declaration in their preamble. And this is interesting. I think for me, it's one of the most interesting part. The declaration also provides us with the basis for ensuring equal rights for various groups, such as sexual orientation, gay, lesbian, transgender people. It offers this opportunity, even though it was not part of the general discourse in 1948. That's how wide the declaration is. Everyone is entitled to all the freedoms listed in the declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. The last words of that sentence, other status, have frequently been cited to expand the list of people who are specifically protected. Not only the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, but also persons with disabilities who now have a convention of their own, which was adopted in 2006. That also includes the elderly, old people. This is in addition to indigenous people as well as to minorities of all sorts. As mentioned earlier, the Universal Declaration inspired other international language. For example, the World Health Organization's definition of health. This is one of the quotes I use the most at my work at the UN Population Fund. Health is a complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. The enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health is one of the most fundamental rights every human being, without distinction or race, religion, political belief, economic or social condition. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was a stepping stone, firstly, for the international continent on the civil and political rights, and secondly, for the international continent on economic and social and cultural rights. I hope this language is not too end for you, but that's the way it's put together at the United Nations. The revolutionary aspect of these instruments was that states, for the first time, voluntarily subscribed to legally binding documents which impose obligations on them concerning their domestic affairs and the treatment of their own citizens. The fundamental rights were further developed with subsequent core human rights treaties, conventions, including the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and the Convention of the Rights of the Child, as well as its optional protocol on the involvement of children in armed conflict or on the sale of children. And I just wanted to remind you that we are all born with dignity, free and equal. We know that still millions of people on this planet do not stay free and not equal. Their dignity is trampled and their rights are violated on a daily basis. This is why the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is relevant today as it was more than 70 years ago. I'd like to go back just to one thing I mentioned, which is the number of languages it was translated in, 531, and it's still ongoing. And it's a good thing. It's still relevant today, and it's still open for new rights to be added. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian.
You're welcome.
Marek, now you can talk about the Noto project and how it will eventually, I think, expand the number of languages with the Declaration of Human Rights. So I'll turn it over to you, Marek.
Thank you. Let me start by thanking you for inviting me and thanking all of you to all of the participants for participating in it. I will talk to you about what Noto project is and Noto connection to UDHR, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I am the second Noto generation at Google. I am a technical program manager specializing in fonts and have worked on Noto since 2015. Noto fonts were started by the first generation, Noto generation, about 2012. That's 10 years ago. Initially, they were known as the Droid font family because of their connection with the Android phone system. However, after both Chrome OS at Google, and Android decided to fund them, the first Noto fonts arrived in early 2014. Noto fonts are now part of the Google design platform. Billions of devices and millions of websites globally use Noto fonts. For example, if you use Android phone, you definitely have Noto fonts on it. If you use iOS, meaning you have iPhone, you might be able to use also Noto fonts. So, Noto as a brand name is derived from tofu. Tofu, also known as the bean curd, is an Asian food derived from soy milk. It is frequently served in cubes. Tofu is also a word used for the empty box shown by a computer while displaying a character when it cannot find an appropriate glyph in a font. The more languages a device, like a phone or tablet or a computer, can cover, the less tofu will be presented to a user. No tofu was our ultimate goal. So the Noto family name was chosen as a shortened No Tofu. Noto project now offers funds for more than 150 scripts, 154 to be exact, and over 1,000 languages. We do it using over 2,600 font files. At this point, all Noto CJK, all non-CJK, where CJK stands for Chinese, Japanese, and Korean fonts, are open source for both binary font files and sources. Our sources are available in either UFO or glyphs formats, which are basically widely used by the font developers. They are all published on GitHub and licensed under SIL Open Font license, which enables to use both binaries and our sources to derive your own work under license terms. We are also available for downloads on the web. They are available through funds.google.com/Noto. The open sources enable us to think of Noto as a reference implementation. Basically, it's an example of how a font developer might implement a script. We have minimums for living and revival languages. Basically, we want to make sure that we have at least regular through medium instances and a variable font. For wider usage, we have expanded weights, thin to black, width, and more styles. For example, Arabic has Kufi, Naskh, Sans, and Nastaliq. Same with Hebrew. Unicode Consortium defines a standard for emojis and text. Only scripts specified by the Unicode have a chance to become part of the Noto family. It will not be part of Noto if it's not part of the Unicode standard. When a font developer updates a font, an existing font, or creates a new font, we need a test. We need to be able to test it using sample text. When developing a font, we also need to demonstrate how it looks when presented with other fonts in the Noto font family. Our Noto website needs to show the capabilities and look of the font. Here are some of the sample texts that we use either during the testing or I grabbed a screenshot from the funds.google.com. The requirements for the text samples are as follows. A sample text needs to be available in many languages. We need to have rights to display or use this text. And the text has to be acceptable and non-controversial to all readers from all cultures, all backgrounds, and so on. Using the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a perfect as a text sample for many, but not all living languages. I say not all because UDHR samples are available for about 490. That's my data, which Christian actually updated to more than 500 languages. Noto covers about 1,000 languages. And we need samples for all of them. Besides defining a standard for both emojis and text, Unicode also runs UDHR in Unicode project to illustrate the use of Unicode for a wide variety of languages using the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a representative text. The UDHR was selected because it is available in many languages. UDHR in Unicode is an open source project. We, meaning you and I and everybody else, are all encouraged to review existing translations or provide new ones. If you know a language, you can contribute to it. If you have skills, knowledge, talent, and expertise, there might be a Noto opportunity for you. This is basically an ad for Noto, how you can get involved with Noto. Noto work is never done because Unicode yearly adds new scripts or updates existing new ones. For example, based on the last 5 new years, Unicode added yearly 5 new scripts, updated about 900 new characters. We encourage users, Noto users, to record and submit Noto issues on GitHub. Therefore, the existing Noto scripts might not be perfect and have issues that need to be resolved. We also might need to redesign an already implemented font family. As a result, Noto is a living project that we keep improving and making it better every year. That's it from me. That was my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Marek. I think it's interesting as we talk about, and Jennifer will talk about, how involvement of the user becomes extremely important in development of communication and the dissemination of information. With that, I'm going to introduce or turn it over to Jennifer May, who can kind of tie it up and why we talk about this here at ArtCenter and within the field of design and communication. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jennifer, to talk about this incredible project and how DesignMatters looks at these different areas to really bring it back to the educational programming here at ArtCenter.
Absolutely. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so thank you so much, Gloria, for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm really thrilled to be here with my fellow panelists, and I'm going to just really briefly describe a little bit about what DesignMatter is and how it works. And then I'll talk about 3 projects that DesignMatters has done that touches on issues of human rights. So DesignMatters celebrated our 20th anniversary this past fall, which from what I can see makes DesignMatters one of the first social innovation programs at the undergraduate level here in the United States. And it is through DesignMatters work that ArtCenter College of Design is the first and only art and design college that is designated as an NGO with the United Nations. As Gloria mentioned in her introduction, DesignMatters works under 5 key pillars. So those are social justice, where we work with communities to address issues of equity and justice; sustainable development, which brings in the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We mostly work in education and climate change through this pillar; public policy, which acknowledges the very long history of design and art and advocacy; social entrepreneurship, which looks at the intersection of design and business models and how those can make a positive impact together; and health, which has been a very popular topic for our students for the past 3 or 4 years, where we really look at healthcare equity as well as healthcare communications. And so everything we do touches on at least one of these pillars, but typically it touches on more because there are so many intersections between these pillars that we work within. So what we hope to achieve by working through these pillars are our program learning objectives, where we look for the innovation at the intersection of design disciplines and disciplines disciplines outside of design, and team-based collaboration. We bring anti-racist and decolonial perspectives by partnering really closely with ArtCenter's Humanities and Sciences Department to make sure our students have the appropriate historical and cultural context on the issues they're addressing. We drive community values, social change, and advocacy through our work. And of course, our work requires a lot of research. So we make sure that our students are really informed about the best design research methodologies, as well as the most up-to-date ethical practices. And our goal is for all of this to lead to a culture of equity-minded designers, where students are leaving school, of course, as excellent designers, but also as informed and responsible global citizens with a real understanding of how the power of their work and how their work can impact people around the world. So the first project I'm going to talk about is from back in 2008, which was actually the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the Declaration of Human Rights. So this was a studio course we did in partnership with our illustration department here at ArtCenter and the UN DPI, UN Department of Public Information. So our students worked with two kind of key advisors, Gayla Nerezzo, who is a consultant with the UN and a photographer, and Professor Alison Dundas-Rittner, who was at the time at USC and an expert in international law and human rights. So the students' goal here was to take the UN Declaration of Human Rights and interpret it into a series of posters. These posters eventually became an actual traveling exhibition that was sponsored by the France Los Angeles Exchange Foundation. So they were first shown at the UN DPI's conference at UNESCO headquarters in Paris in 2008. Then they came back to Pasadena and were shown at the Pasadena Central Library, and then at the Skirball Cultural Center over in Los Angeles. And they are finally now part of the permanent collection of the Holocaust Memorial Center in Michigan. So I thought I would just give you a little bit of a closer look at some of these posters, and you can see in the students' own words what they were really hoping to achieve through their design. This first poster by Ani was actually licensed to the National Model UN in 2009 and became the identity for their youth conference. So some of the posters address different specific articles, and some of the posters looked more at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a whole. Brooke's poster here really looks at it through the lens of what it means for children to have this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'm just going to pause just to let people kind of read if they're reading the quotes from the students here. And this poster by Benny touches on the article for education. It was a very impactful graphic that he used to kind of show how children have to navigate difficult situations to access education. These next two posters both touch on the same article around slavery and servitude. And you'll see that both of these posters are pretty visceral in addressing this. So they really wanted to be provocative in their approach to this very important article. And then here's a poster by Christopher addressing the same article in a pretty stunning way. And ending on another poster from Christopher, this one addresses the first article by showing a beating human heart that resides in all of us. And these posters, as well as a few other from the series, will be featured very soon in an exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt Museum. We are hoping that we can share details on that very soon. But this was a really wonderful project that obviously was shown and has had a great impact. It's had a great impact on the students that were involved as well. You know, they get to see their work continue to be shown and exhibited, and it really impacted them as students. The next project I wanted to touch on is Words in Exile, which was a project we did actually with the HMCT and Archetype Press, and in partnership with the International Rescue Committee. We also had experts from the American Red Cross and the UN High Commissioner on Refugees. And this was supported by a grant from the Autodesk Foundation. What I really liked about this project is it really emphasizes and shows what we try to do in Design Matters, which is the layers of learning. So there is this layer of learning where the students were learning traditional letterpress methodology. There's a layer of learning where they were doing deep research on issues around refugees and looking into first-person accounts from refugees. And then there's the layer where they started to understand the power of type, font, and design and interpreting these first-person accounts and sharing them out to make an impact. So I thought this was a really successful project. I have some of these posters in my own home that I love. And some of the posters and the book that came out of the studio were actually sold, a limited edition of them were sold, and the proceeds went back to the International Rescue Committee, which was a great outcome from the studio as well. And then the last project I wanted to touch on was a project we did pretty recently with a local organization called United We Stay, where students looked at common myths around immigration and immigrants in the United States, and they designed a poster series to address some of those myths. They also looked at the Undocumented Americans Bill of Rights and designed a brochure to promote that document of human rights for undocumented Americans. This project was covered by several local news stations and was exhibited at City Hall here in Los Angeles. And for the students in this course, they really learned how to collaborate as a team while doing their own individual pieces. So each poster was designed by one of the 6 students, and then they collaborated together on the actual brochure. So I think that was a huge learning outcome for them. Each of them also either was or had a close family member who was a recent immigrant. So I think this project really impacted them on a deeply personal level as well. I do want to give credits to our faculty and students who worked on each of these 3 projects. So I wanted to put their names up here and just thank them all for their beautiful and thoughtful and creative work, where the kind of expertise of our partners, the insights from their research, and the guidance of faculty married together with their design and creativity to produce these beautiful projects. And that's it from me. If you're interested in these projects, our website is here, and we have case studies on each of these projects, as well as the other projects that we've done. I think since 2006, we have case studies for every project. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I want to thank you for that. I forgot about the Words in Exile project. That was a very interesting project. For those of you who are interested, we do have some Words in Exile books still available. Marek and Christian, I will gladly send you a copy of the books. And for anyone else, you can always contact us here at the HMCT if you're interested in that. I also want to say that we are continuing the type as the universal voice of peace, dignity, and equality. Again, we started a whole nother series at ArtCenter at Archetype Press on another typographic interpretation of these articles. And so we're going to continue that, Jennifer, with another iteration of in different type of interpretation, much more typographic than illustrative, because it is done with our wonderful foundry here at the press. I have an interesting question or discussion, I think. I find global unification, some people have difficulty with this, the global unification that is happening with Noto fonts. I find Noto fonts serves a different function rather than just a design function. I mean, designers might think Noto font is trying to take over the world of design and communication, but it's not. I think its function is far higher than that. It really allows a universal communication of ideas and understanding to these very important issues today. I think perhaps you can disagree with me, you can agree with me, but is Noto, is the, and Marek, you can answer this, is I think was the aim of the Noto project goes beyond type design. It goes beyond sharing communication. Am I right about my perception about this?
I'll give you my perspective. I haven't heard the answer to this, so I'm going to create it right now for you. Basically, there are about, and I don't remember where I got this number. There are about 6,000 languages in the world or so. We wanted to make sure that we create a level playing field for all of these languages. You cannot have a level playing field unless the language exists as a spoken language, but also it needs to exist as a written language. Because this way they can write their existing experiences, communicate via phones or via printed media or whatever. So Noto exists for this purpose. That's how I see it. Create a level playing field for every language that exists in the world. So
yeah, I think it definitely creates individual. It's not saying you can't be individuals, because according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, right, Christian, it's about individuals.
Yes.
You know, and respect of the individual. So I think both the Noto and the Declaration of Human Rights protects the individual, allows for the individual voice, which perhaps gets lost a little bit today, or a lot today. You know, I think that's what DesignMatters tries to emphasize, right, Jennifer? You're emphasizing the individual voice of the designer. It's individual, even though it talks about a universal issue, right? I go ahead, Christian.
Yeah, this makes me think of two major exercises many governments go through. The first one is a census. Every 10 years, most countries in the world go through a census. It's the second most intense exercise any government does, second only to war. So it gives you an idea of the l'ampleur, the magnitude of doing a census. And a census is about individuals being able to count. So are elections. And I remember both in Afghanistan, some other countries, have some colleagues who had worked in Myanmar as well. When you need to communicate to your census takers or people who are going out to encourage you to vote, they'll get most likely their communication on smartphones. When they travel and they go to villages and they need to be able to show something. So that's a real surface for text to appear, for people to have their voices heard. I'm just trying to make these connections because I can see how this application can be useful. I know I had worked with designers who were trying to create a series of posters to encourage Afghans to vote. And it was more graphic than it was typographic, but it had both elements. In Myanmar, where there's a lot of coast, fishermen are very, very important, and they transmit information. And they also have access to electronics as well. So typography and graphic design has real implications in order to have individuals speak out and have their individual voices.
And clearly communicate the information. I think that's extremely important. We did get a question, and I'm going to throw it out to anyone who can answer this. I'm sure, Jennifer, this is right up your alley. It's in the chat room. It says, thanks for the great talk. Thank you for the compliment, James. Are there any creative methods of collaboration to create effective communication between cultures of different languages? So have we developed any new methodologies that addresses this? Jennifer?
Sure. So a lot of DesignMatters past projects have gone into the field in other countries where our design students might not speak the language. In that case, we do a lot of kind of working together. You know, if everyone has a pen in their hand and a piece of paper and they're all sketching and drawing together, that breaks down barriers. It really does, and creates a shared understanding of where you're going together. That being said, we do always have translators with us as well, because it is important to communicate verbally. But oftentimes getting together around the table and collaborating in a visual way, in a very tactile way, is a great method to bring everyone together at the table and get that understanding going.
Yeah. I think, and then technology is advancing all of this ability to communicate. And I hate to say lose the translators. Christian, you were telling Marek earlier how Google Translate has really changed the landscape of communication between cultures. True.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's amazing now that I think understanding, and that's always been difficult. I think what we need to do is technology needs to keep up with. And I think that's what Google Fonts does and what Noto Fonts does. You must keep up with the technology so that the communication is still the same. And obviously you all agree with me, the hand-painted sign and the use of the pen is always universally, if you can scratch a message in the sand, if you can write it on the wall, that's still the most effective way of communicating. You don't have to worry about technology breaking down. But with using technology, like you say, for elections, for social media communications, I'm amazed at how much information and imagery we are able to get because technology is that much better. Information is that much better. You know, the ability to perhaps communicate Marek in, you know, in Derengari, something that was said in the United States. Someone who doesn't understand English can perhaps now see it on their phone to understand. It's I think breaking down the barriers is what's extremely important. We'll always have an individuality of culture, but the ability to talk to each other has just been enhanced greatly by, I think, the Noto project, personally.
Noto, Google Translate, and basically our ability to travel freely and interact with different cultures. That's what I believe enhances, at least me. When I encounter different cultures, different people, I sort of grow as a person. So this is what Noto, Google, and the work that you've been doing enables us to achieve.
So we have one more question, and this is, I was waiting for this question. Saeed, thank you. While the idea and purpose of the UDHR is aspirational, it seems unclear what the impact of it is. And I think Christian spoke about this impact, especially when one reads the things being spoken against being actively done by states like the USA, Israel, Russia, etc. I'm not going to say that there are a lot of other bad, or let's say other states in the world that, besides the big ones. Is there any data suggesting that sharing this declaration is actually translating hope into action? I think, Christian, you spoke of this, and Saeed, I think it's hard for us to see, especially today. We only see the extreme loud cries of violence of this, but Christian, what did happen because of the Declaration of Human Rights?
So thank you for the question. In order to, the declaration itself, it's not its implementation. The implementation comes through covenants and different legal documents that governments sign up for. they are monitored by many NGOs, other government bodies, Human Rights Watch, for example. That's just one that's well known. And there's a scorecard, and to see how they're meeting the challenges of the declaration. Universal access to school, for example, that's critical. So all these issues, yes, there is a scorecard for nation states, for member states. And it's been monitored, and there's reports coming out, so people, governments, elected officials are accountable.
Well, and I think, Saeed, and I think everyone, I think we should, conclude on this note. Perhaps we hadn't necessarily seen the impact of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but I certainly think it's been brought to life again today. And maybe perhaps it's an opportunity to reinforce, or to say that, or to re-examine behaviors, to re-examine its impact, to re-examine the importance of the UN again. I mean, you're right, hope, aspiration turns to action. And perhaps all we can say is, through this universal communication, we can communicate today that was not available in 1948. That was not available 20 years ago. So perhaps because of the advancement in communication, the advancement of the way we talk to each other or able to communicate with each other, will enable more action to happen. Our goals can turn into action, and that's all we can, I guess, hope for or strive for or work for. So I thank you, everyone, for attending. And I thank you, Christian, and I thank you, Marek, and I thank you, Jennifer. And I want to thank my staff, of course, for always, Clifford, thank you, and Susan, and Lavinia, and everyone else at the HMCT for helping put this together. And I also want to thank Google Fonts. Again, it's a pleasure to work with Google Fonts and to work with the D&AD New Blood Awards that are, everyone should look for the New Blood Awards, and let's see the results of this new project that deals with, communication, typography, Noto fonts, and the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Again, it's all to keep the conversation going. So I thank everyone for attending, and thank you, my guests. And I look forward to our next conversation on our next project.